Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Welcome to lesson number 2. In this lesson we will cover who needs to pay zakah, what is meant by Nisab and Sharah, which is the threshold and the proportion of zakat calculation, and then we will cover some general essential concepts about zakah. So let's begin. The first question is, who needs to pay zakah? Zakah is an obligation on every Muslim who reaches the level of threshold. This level of threshold is also known as Nisab in Arabic. Irrespective of your age, your gender, your marital status, your mental caliber, if a person has possessions and wealth that is above the level of Nisab, then they owe zakah. Now, of course, for minors, if they have property on their name, or if there are other people who just cannot handle their money very well, but they have wealth that is above the level of threshold, then someone else can help in calculating and giving out their zakat, but it is still a fard on them. Zakah is due on the wealth that we have in our possession or we have access to it. This is important when it comes to some of the commodities and categories on which we have to pay zakah. That either we have possession of that wealth or we have access to the wealth. Maybe it's not in our immediate possession, but we are able to access it. Also, we should keep in mind that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Inna Allah tayyibun la yaqbalu illa tayyiba." That Allah is pure, Allah is tayyib, and He does not accept anything but that is pure and tayyib. So when we are seeking the reward of Allah by giving sadaqat and giving zakat, we should also keep in mind that our earnings and our wealth and our accumulation of wealth should be through halal means. And through halal means, when we give charity, inshallah, Allah accepts it. Now coming to these terms of Nisab and Sharah, and we will repeat these terms many times as the course goes on. Nisab means the threshold above which zakah becomes mandatory. So you have a certain amount of wealth. Now, if it reaches a threshold, a certain line, and that amount is defined differently for each commodity, but after you reach above that threshold, then zakah becomes mandatory on you. The percentage or the amount that you have to pay in zakah, that is known as sharah. Now, wealth can be in different forms and different commodities. For example, you could have gold, silver, and money. You can have trade items if you have a business in retail or in business in sale where you have inventory, so you have trade items. Then you have farm animals, and for these three commodities, zakat becomes due when 1 year has passed that you have possessed the property above the level of nisab for the whole year. We'll talk about these in more details when we come to specific commodities. Then we have agricultural produce and harvesting, and earthly treasures and mines, and on these last two commodities, zakat becomes due at the time of extraction or at the time of harvest of the crops. You don't have to pass a whole year to give it, but you pay it at the time of the harvest. When it comes to money and wealth, here are some general principles. On this graph, we can see 2 calendar years on the x-axis, from 1 to 12, and then again from 1 to 12. And these are lunar months for a lunar calendar, keeping in mind that the lunar calendar is about 10 days shorter than a solar calendar. And zakat is based on the calculation from lunar calendar. And then on the y-axis you have wealth. If a person starts a new job and is now just starting to earn money, and now he reaches a point where the wealth he has goes above the level of nisab. The first rule to keep in mind is that your calendar year will start from the day when you had wealth that was above the level of nisab. So your clock starts here. Now let's say for the next couple of months, the wealth became less than the level of nisab, and then it went back up again. So your calendar resets from the new date. Point being that whenever you are above the level of nisab, you have to stay above the level of nisab for the next 12 months for zakat to be mandatory on you. And now a whole year passes. For these 12 months, the person always stayed above the level of nisab in their total wealth, and now they have to pay zakah. You don't have to wait for the end of the year to pay your zakah. You could pay your zakah earlier. And you could also say, I want to reset my clock from this month, so that from this point I can calculate my next year and the year afters. Like most people would like to give their zakat in Ramadan. I personally calculate my zakat in Ramadan. So I've reset my month in the very beginning to Ramadan by paying zakat earlier for the first time, and after that, it's always every Ramadan I do my calculations. You may want to point 1 month in time to do all your calculations, but you don't have to wait for that month to give the zakah. You can give zakah throughout the year, but appoint a time in a year where you always do your calculations so you don't mess it up. So I'm going to calculate from the 9th month, which is Ramadan, to the 9th month of the next year, and I will see how much I need to pay. Now, there are two opinions when it comes to that. One opinion is that the minimum amount I always had for the whole year, on that I have to pay zakat. And that would be the least amount throughout this 12-month period, because that's the amount I had for the whole year. Rest of the amount came and went. That's one opinion. The other opinion, which I favor more, and I think it's a safer option and works out easier and works out well for people who have multiple sources of revenues or who have job and get salaries, because your wealth might fluctuate up and down throughout the year. You have expenditures, running incomes, and you may have multiple sources of incomes as well. In that case, I think the option 2 works better, and it's also a safer option, which tells us that irrespective of how much wealth you had throughout the year, as long as you stayed above the level of Nisab for that whole year, then whenever you do your calculation, on that date, whatever you have, you pay zakah on it. So let me repeat this. As long as you stayed above the level of Nisab for the whole year, then whatever value, whatever wealth you have on the date of your zakat calculation, let's say if it's 1st of Ramadan when I do my calculations, then I will look at whatever I have on 1st of Ramadan and calculate my zakat based on that value. I wouldn't worry about what was my lowest amount of balance throughout the year. And if you follow that rule, it will be easier for us to never go wrong. For example, in 2 rolling years, this person gave zakat at a certain stage when the year ended, and the next year ended at a certain level, and they give zakat based on that amount, irrespective of how the wealth fluctuated. So these are some of the general rules about calculating zakat, and we'll go in more details for each commodity in the next lesson. Another rule that we should not combine properties that are split, or not split the properties that are combined just for the sake of zakat calculation, because this way we could undercalculate the zakat, and people could use this as a way to give less zakat or have their calculations show less. Based on the hadith that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu instructed Anas bin Malik, Farada Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam instructed us or made compulsory on us about the matters of zakah, that وَلَا يُجْمَعُ بَيْنَ مُتَفَرِّقٍ وَلَا يُفَرَّقُ بَيْنَ مُجْتَمِعٍ خَشْيَةَ صَدَقَةٍ. Neither the property of different people may be taken together, nor the joint property may be split for fear of paying more zakat. For example, there are 2 brothers who have farm animals, and one of them owns 40 sheep, another one owns 50 sheep. Now, the nisab for sheep is 40. So if someone has between 40 and 120 sheep, then they have to give 1 sheep in zakat. So by this rule, each one of these brothers have reached the level of nisab, and they both should give 1 sheep each. But they could trick the system and combine their sheep together and say, oh, this is our combined property. And in that case, the total turns out to be 90, which is still between 40 to 120, and now they only have to pay 1 sheep in zakat instead of 2 sheep. So this way they can trick the system, but Allah is watching us, who is all-knowing and all-aware. And similarly, people can find other ways of cutting corners and not giving zakat. For example, if a mother owns 2 or 3 gold sets, and total amount of gold in her possession is above the level of nisab, and she needs to pay zakat on it. But as soon as the time for zakat comes, she splits the gold and says, oh, this is for me and this is for my daughter, or this is for me or this is for some other family member, just so that she could split them and bring both of them below the levels of zakat so that no zakat is payable. This is wrong, and we need to keep in mind that Allah is all aware of what we are doing. So with that, we end our lesson number 2. In the next 2 lessons, we will learn how zakat is calculated for each separate commodity, what is the nisab and what is the sharah, and what is the rulings about some of the newer forms of wealth that we are seeing these days, and how do we learn from the principles of zakat. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.